I watched An American in Austen on Saturday night, and I had high expectations for this one because I love a good time travel movie. Was this a hit or a miss for Hallmark? I think it's going to depend on who you ask. How will I rate this one? Well, I have some mixed feelings about it myself, so let's dive right in and talk about it. An American in Austen premiered on Hallmark Channel on February 17th and stars Eliza Bennet and a lot of other supporting actors. In the opening credits, they gave Nicholas Bishop second billing, but in my opinion, there really wasn't what I would consider to be a male lead in this one. He played Mr. Darcy, but I have my reservations about his interpretation of this character. I will say the main storyline was actually a very good one. I could almost compare it to It's a Wonderful Life in that our main character, Harriet, doesn't appreciate how good her life is, or in this case, what a wonderful man she has in her life who loves her dearly and wants to marry her.
Hello, my love.
Now I have to tell you, I think I found an Easter egg in here. I didn't even see it the first time through, but when I watched it again to write my review, I looked at the Pride and Prejudice book she was holding in the library more closely. And check this out. Sorry, no pun intended. The cover of the book shows the introduction was written by Victoria Jennings. Does this name ring any bells? She's the Princeton professor from Paging Mr. Darcy that Eloise was trying to impress. Coincidence?
Isn't it marvelous?
Anyway, back to the story. Harriet falls asleep in the cab ride home after her boyfriend's proposal, to which she replied,
Maybe?
And after making a wish on a shooting star, suddenly finds herself riding in a horse-drawn carriage on her way to Longbourn, the Bennet family's estate from Pride and Prejudice. I thought it was very clever writing to make Harriet fit in as the Bennet's American cousin who was coming to stay with them. But if you saw my Twitter posting on Saturday night, you'll know that they lost me the moment she stepped out of the carriage, and I am so over these awkward, klutzy characters in leading roles in Hallmark movies. There is just nothing funny or endearing about that to me. I realize I am only one of probably millions of people around the world who have read Pride and Prejudice, and I'm sure everyone has a different vision of what each character from the book should look like. I know I certainly do. So I'm going to share what I think they got right, and admittedly where I wondered if anyone who made this movie had actually read the book themselves. There are times where I think maybe they've only read the Cliff Notes version. Let's start with Mrs. Bennet. I loved the casting of her character in this one. I knew I recognized her the moment I saw her face, but I had to look her up to remember why. She played Fred's wife Clara in The Muppet Christmas Carol. My only critique of Mrs. Bennet in this movie is she seemed to be too level-headed and sweet and understanding as compared to the way she was written in the book. While truthfully I love this about her in the movie, I always envisioned Mrs. Bennet as a grown-up version of Lydia, a silly, foolish teenager in a grown-up body. Just think of how many times she complained to Mr. Bennet about how he had no compassion for her nerves. To me, that was her way of throwing tantrums when she didn't get her way. Not to mention, in the book, she actually told Elizabeth that she would never see her again if she refused to marry Mr. Collins. Can you see the sweet Mrs. Bennet in this movie ever saying that to her?
Of course I want them happy.
Mr. Bennet had very little screen time, so I don't have much of an opinion of him one way or another. I think his only purpose was to show off his sideburns.
Sideburns.
Actually, on that note, I must give credit to the sets and costumes. They were spectacular. I have only two minor critiques. One is Elizabeth's bangs. I think they were too straight and down her forehead for the period. When I looked up Regency-style hairstyles, I only saw bangs that were really curled and off the forehead pushed over to the sides of the face. The second one had to do with a fantastic cameo appearance, which I'll get to in a moment. First, let's talk about the sisters. Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Jane's character in this movie was close to accurate, but not quite right in that she displayed too much emotion in the movie.
He is gone and he shall not return this winter.
If you recall in the book, The reason Mr. Bingley was swayed by Mr. Darcy to just leave in the first place was because Jane was so shy and reserved, she did not give him enough indication that she was really falling for him. And even after she found out that he left Netherfield and bottled up much of her pain inside, and she didn't let it show just how much she was hurting. Elizabeth wasn't bad either. I had to take some time to put my thoughts together about her. Like in the book, she was intelligent but not nerdy, and she wasn't afraid to speak her mind, but she wasn't flighty either.
Your principal defect being your propensity to hate everyone.
In the movie, Elizabeth was too flighty and emotional for my liking.
You cannot help but to meddle, can you, cousin?
The part I had to think about, and I still don't know the answer, so I'd love to hear your take on this, was that intentional to the story?
Miss Elizabeth is next in line and has all the qualities of which you seek.
Was Harriet's interference in Elizabeth's life so critical that her character changed that drastically?
No.
As for the younger three sisters, I don't have much of an opinion of Kitty.
I brought you one of my dresses to wear today.
In either the book or the movie, she was kind of overlooked a lot, which was true to character in my opinion. Lydia was supposed to be the silliest, most impulsive of them all, but in the movie, she and Elizabeth practically switched places.
I would never.
Again, was that by design due to Harriet's interference?
Perhaps Cousin Harriet can borrow some clothes for the ball.
I will say I laughed when Lydia was critical of Elizabeth's running off with Mr. Wickham, and Harriet said,
Okay, well, that's a little ironic coming from you.
Mary was supposed to be a nerdy bookworm, but in the movie she was far too pretty and feminine. Does this look like a nerdy bookworm to you? I suppose she was probably true to character in accepting Mr. Collins' proposal.
Thank you, Papa.
Not that that happened in the book, but since the storyline had changed, I think it makes sense that she would have accepted such a proposal because it was the logical thing to do.
We are not all afforded the luxury of love.
Speaking of Mr. Collins, his character was spot on. He was supposed to be somewhat creepy and obsessed with material things, so the scene at the dinner table where he was admiring the house he would someday inherit was pretty accurate.
The house is also well maintained.
And how about the special appearance by Sarah Ferguson? I noticed she was also listed as an executive producer, so I liked that she had a bit role in here too.
We are so pleased you could join us on this beautiful evening.
I'm a little surprised she didn't play Lady Catherine de Bourgh, but maybe that's a step down for a duchess. My only critique of her is that she wore what I think is modern day makeup. Somehow I don't see the ladies of that era wearing this much makeup, but I'm not going to let that bother me. I love that she's involved with this. As you can see by now, Harriet interfered with their lives so much that she changed up the story quite a bit. Mr. Darcy proposed to her first. Mr. Wickham showed up at the ball where he wasn't supposed to. Mr. Collins proposed to Mary, of all people, and Elizabeth ran off to marry Mr. Wickham. So, of course, these were all crises that Harriet needed to fix before the ending, and ultimately everything did work out. However, having said that, the ending of the Pride and Prejudice part of the story was way too forced. Not Jane and Mr. Bingley. We know those two were already in love by this point in the story. They were just too afraid to admit it to each other. No, I'm referring to Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. In the book, it took quite a bit of time for Elizabeth to realize she was falling in love with him, and the movie only touched on the very early parts of the book. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth hardly had time to interact, yet at the end, he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. Not to mention this was only mere days after he had just proposed to Harriet.
Will you make me the happiest of men and be my wife?
That bothered me. Mr. Darcy was not that flighty in the book. The real ending for Harriet, though, was pretty good, except for finding the old book in the cab.
It was real.
I know I said this is like It's a Wonderful Life, but that book was added for no reason other than to force it in there to look like It's a Wonderful Life. And why did that cab driver have to be so rude?
Beat it.
Are typical cab drivers just like that by reputation? Well, the ending I liked was that there was some character growth in Harriet. She learned to stop comparing her man to the fictional Mr. Darcy, and they had their happy ending.
But I just feel like I'm seeing things so clearly now.
It was cute. Not spectacular, but cute. Although I didn't like Harriet's character one bit, The overall story and message of the movie was surprisingly enough to save this one for me the second time around. It must be because I love time travel stories, and It's a Wonderful Life is one of my all-time favorites. And I can't overlook the sets and the costumes. Whoever was in charge of these, they were spectacular. So for all these reasons, I'll give it 3 out of 5. I know you might think this is awfully low, but I was looking at a 1 or a 2 the first hour and 20 minutes of watching it, so it really did come up from there. I can't go any higher than that because I didn't feel any emotions at the end, and I never felt any connection with Harriet. She was annoying and selfish and made herself the center of attention in every scene, including answering other characters' questions. This movie had the potential to be so much better, in my opinion. So what did you think? I would love to know what your thoughts are about this movie. I've already read and seen a few opinions from those who loved this movie, so please share your own opinions in the comments below. I'm always interested in good conversation, and not just with those who agree with me. As always, thank you so much for watching this episode of Magical Movie Club. If you like this and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel and consider following us on Instagram at Magical Movie Club and on Twitter at Magical Movie Club with no U. You can find those links below in the description, as well as links to the preview and a sneak peek video of An American Austen at Hallmark.com. We'll see you next week to chat more about our favorite magical movies.
I must make a confession.
Do you really have to?
You're a